Plum as wife and Crane as child.
梅妻鹤子
Hello everyone. He called a plum tree his wife and a crane his son. His name was Linbu. He lived 1,000 years ago in China. He was born in a small village south of the Yangtze River. The year was 967. War had torn the land apart just a few decades before. The great Tang dynasty was gone. Empires rose and fell like autumn leaves. And in the middle of that chaos a boy sat reading old books by candlelight. His family had nothing. The floor was dirt. The walls were thin. Sometimes the rice pot was empty. But Linbu had a mind that burned brighter than any candle. He read Confucius. He read Lao Tzu. He read the histories of men who fought and won and lost and died. He learned that the world outside was loud. It was full of silk robes and silver wine cups and sharp swords. But none of it called to him. Something else did. He left the village when he was a young man. He traveled for years. He saw the yellow river muddy and swollen. He saw the great cities of the north. He saw men kneel for titles and women weep for husbands lost to border wars. Everywhere he went he heard the same noise. The noise of wanting. More land. More gold. More fame. He listened politely. Then he turned his face south and walked toward the water. He stopped at Hangzhou. And there he saw West Lake for the first time. The water was still and green. The hills around it were soft and blue in the morning mist. He rented a small boat and rowed out to Gushin, a tiny island shaped like a sleeping dragon. Bamboo grew wild on its slopes. Birds sang without fear. And in the center of the island stood the ruins of an old temple garden. Plum trees grew there. Very old plum trees. Their bark was black and twisted like calligraphy strokes. He touched one of the trunks and felt something he had never felt before. He felt home. He was 40 years old when he built his hut. He made it himself from mud and reeds and salvaged wood. It was small. One room. A desk by the window. A simple bed. A stone hearth for tea. And all around it he planted plum trees. Not one or two. Hundreds of them. White ones and pink ones and deep red ones. He knew each tree by its shape. He knew when the first bud would break. He would stand in the snow and watch the petals push through the ice. He said they taught him everything. They taught him patience. They taught him how to be beautiful without an audience. And then there were the cranes. He raised two. They were wild things, but they stayed with him. They would eat from his hand. They would sleep by his door. And they became the strangest doorbell in history. When he wanted to be alone, he would row his boat into the middle of the lake and drift for hours. If someone came to visit while he was gone, his boy servant would release one of the cranes. It would climb into the sky white against the gray clouds. It would circle slowly like a brushstroke of smoke. Linbu would see it from the water. He would smile and dip his oar and glide back to shore. He said the cranes were better than any letter. They brought no bad news. Time passed slowly on Gushin. He grew old. His hair turned white like the crane feathers. His hands grew thin and strong from tending trees. He wrote poems every day. But he never kept them. He would grind ink on his old stone and write a few lines on a scrap of paper. He would read them aloud to the plum trees. Then he would burn the paper and watch the smoke rise. A neighbor once begged him to stop destroying his work. "Your words are treasures," the neighbor said. Linbu just shook his head. "Treasures are heavy," he replied. "I travel light." One visitor managed to copy down a poem before Linbu could burn it. That is how we have the lines about the plum blossoms. Sparse shadows slant across the shallow water. Faint fragrance drifts in the moonlit dusk. 7 characters in Chinese. A whole world in 7 characters. The slant of light. The smell of cold air. The feeling of being utterly alone and utterly at peace. Those 2 lines made him famous. But fame never reached his island. He had made sure of that. He died in the winter of 1028. He was 61 years old. They found him sitting under his oldest plum tree. He looked like he was sleeping. The snow had dusted his shoulders. The crane stood silent in the branches above him. People came from the city to bury him. They dug a grave on the southern slope facing the water. They lowered him into the earth wrapped in a simple cloth. And then the strangest thing happened. The cranes walked around the grave in slow circles. They called out in voices that sounded like weeping. They refused to eat the fish people brought. They grew thinner and thinner. And within a few weeks both of them lay down on the fresh earth and did not get up. The villagers buried them beside him. They said the cranes had done what loyal sons do. They had followed their father home. The plum trees bloomed again that spring. But something was different. The blossoms seemed heavier somehow. They fell in great soft drifts and covered the grave like snow. The island felt very quiet then. And very full. Centuries passed. A thief broke into the tomb on Gushin. He was a greedy man. He had heard legends of a hermit poet who must have hidden treasures under the floor. He dug and he dug. He found no gold. No jade. No silver coins. He found an old inkstone worn smooth by years of use. And he found a woman's hairpin. It was delicate and green with age. A single hairpin. Nothing more. The thief threw it aside and left empty-handed. But that hairpin tells a story Linbu never spoke aloud. He had loved someone once. Before the island. Before the plum trees. He had loved a woman whose name is lost to history. Maybe she died. Maybe she married someone else. Maybe his family could not afford the dowry. We will never know. But we know he carried that hairpin with him for 40 years. It was the only thing in his hut that did not belong to the trees or the birds. He called the plum tree his wife because the real one was gone. He called the crane his son because the real one never came. It was not a rejection of love. It was a way of keeping love alive when the world gave him no other choice. Plum as wife and crane as child. 4 words in English. 4 words that sound like a fairy tale. But the longer you sit with them, the heavier they become. They are not about escape. They are about devotion. Devotion to a memory. Devotion to a small patch of land. Devotion to a way of living that makes sense only to you. What does your island look like? Not a real island, maybe. Maybe it is a quiet hour in the morning before anyone else wakes up. Maybe it is a hobby that makes no money but fills your chest with light. Maybe it is a person you love in a way the world does not understand. Linbu did not ask for a big life. He asked for a true one. And he built it from mud and plum blossoms and the sound of wings. He wrote one more thing before he died. He said, I have lived here a long time. The hills are my friends. The birds know my name. If I have wronged anyone, I hope the lake washes it clean. And if anyone remembers me, let them remember the way the shadows fell across the water at dusk. Sparse shadows slant across the shallow water. Faint fragrance drifts in the moonlit dusk. Maybe that is enough. Maybe a small life lived fully is the biggest life there is. That is the story of Linbu. The man who married the cold and bloomed anyway. See you in the next story.
下集请移步主页观看。